Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whenever you may be tuning in to the Growing Our Future podcast. Listen, number one, thank you for stopping by. And number two, thank you for allowing us to bring the podcast to you. You know, we always tell people that if agriculture's taught us anything, it's taught us this. If you want to know what the future is, grow it. If you want to know what the future is, grow it. Well, to do that, you've got to plant seeds. You got to nurture them. You got to harvest them, and then you got to share them. Well, to plant those seeds, we created a podcast platform to bring subject matter experts, people who have these incredible experiences and insights on, to share with us seeds of greatness. And today is no different. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how I got to meet this man, but we're honored to have Robert Smith join us today. Robert, thank you for joining us on the Growing Our Future podcast.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's an honor to be here with you.
So again, we're going to get into a little bit more about Robert here in just a second. I want to share a little backstory there of how we met. But Robert, every guest that comes on here, I like to start every podcast off the same way. And I like to start with a simple question that's related to gratitude. So I'm just curious, Robert, what are you grateful for today?
You know, that is a solid question. And in doing my own podcast, you know, we hear a lot of advice as podcast hosts, we should have a signature question. And while I don't have that just yet on my podcast, when I saw that was your signature question, I gave it a lot of thought because I wanted to make sure that it was something that would give some level of value to your listeners, to you, to the conversation. And when you gave me that question about a week ago, I didn't know the answer because I'm like, do I go with the standard? Well, I'm grateful for my wife and son. I'm grateful that I got air in my lungs. Like, yeah, I'm grateful for all those things. But I didn't know until yesterday exactly how I was going to answer that. And now I know, and I can tell you today, I am grateful for FFA. And here's why I'm grateful for FFA. For my podcast, the Fair Game Podcast, I had a young lady on who's the state president of the New York FFA. And listening to her speak, you know, she's 18. She is in this generation that we see all over TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram, just making utter fools of themselves, disappointing all of us. And maybe that's just a generational thing. You know, the boomers looked down at one point and went, oh, what's wrong with these kids? And Gen X looks down and goes, what's wrong with these kids? And millennials look like we all do it. But having that conversation with her renewed my hope for the future of America. In large part, that was happened because of FFA, because of the skills and talents that it allowed this young lady to develop. I was able to have this conversation with her and say, you know what? I don't think that what we see on TikTok, et cetera, is actually representative of Gen Z. I think someone like Ella Underberg, who is the state president for New York FFA, I think she's representative of Gen Z. And I think it's 85 or 90% of Gen Z looks and sounds a lot more like her than they do some of these weirdos on TikTok just going off. So a lot of that is because, like, the foundation of that comes from FFA because of her involvement with that organization. And while I was never involved with FFA, I grew up in the suburbs. I'm a city kid. Someone like her, I think, really can renew an old, grumpy 44-year-old's hope in the future for America. So, yeah, I'm grateful for FFA.
Thank you, Robert. And by the way, I agree with you. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say exactly what you just said. We invite people to come to our annual Texas FFA convention. So our convention is the largest youth-led convention in the state. We'll have about 17,000 people there for an entire week. It ranks in the top 5 of all conventions in the association conventions in Texas. But I tell people it's kind of like bring a friend to church day. I said, bring somebody and let them see convention. And they say exactly what you just said. They said, I've never been told yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I've never had so many kids shake my hand, firm handshake, look me in the eye, say their first and last name. They said, Aaron, it's almost like it rejuvenates our hope for this country.
Yep, absolutely did.
And I tell people that all the time. I said, yeah, it's a noisy world out there. And we don't always get to see the good things because all we get to hear is the noise. But it's awesome when I hear people that have a chance to meet people like Ella
Yeah.
I have
Well, and
to.
I think, you say there's so much noise, we don't often hear the good things. I think part of that's because we've bred so much anger into this country
Mm,
that it's easy. And now we all have phones that we can put it out. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this,
mm,
and says social media didn't change us, it exposed us. If you were the type of person that you spread positivity, you now have a device in your pocket that you can instantly spread positivity globally. But
mm.
if you were a jerk, if you spread anger and negativity, you also have that same device. And unfortunately, these algorithms are kind of trained. It's like we all slow down to look at the car crash because for some reason we all have this desire to see carnage. And so the algorithm, we're training the algorithm. Like the algorithm's not some mystical portal, it's responding to us. And so I think that's why we see so much negativities because it's a natural human desire to see it. And I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to change my algorithm. I'm going to go look for things from FFA. I'm going to look at, for more posts and feeds like that. And I will get it because that's how the algorithm works. If you want positivity, go find it. It's there.
Absolutely. And I agree with you, by the way. And I do appreciate what you said. And I agree also that there are so many things to be grateful for. One of my board members is the son of the late great motivational speaker, Zig Ziglar. So Tom Ziglar is on the foundation board, and Tom and I have a lot of these discussions about where we're at today and how we see things. We were talking about gratitude, and that's kind of one
Yep.
reason I really hone in on gratitude. I think it's an important motivation. People that are grateful seem to be more energetic. They seem to be more inspired. They're looking for something good. And Tom was on the East Coast, and he was talking to these college kids, and he asked them. He said, "What is the opposite of gratitude?" And he kind of let it sit in for a minute.
I got to guess.
Let me hear it.
Entitlement.
So what it is? That's what he
Is
said.
it?
It is. He said the
Yeah.
opposite of gratitude is entitlement. And look at what happens to your attitude when you go from being thankful for things and appreciative to that's not fair or that's mine or give that to me. It just changes the whole dynamic of how you feel, how you see things. So when we talk about seeds of greatness and growing the future, I think we have a lot to stop and be grateful for. I tell people that on February 6, 1966, a bouncing baby boy came into this world and they wrapped me in this incredible blanket of freedom and liberty and a country full of opportunity. And I have so much to be grateful for that I can choose what I want to eat, what job I want, if I want to go to church or what sports. I'm just the incredible gift that I've been given. And when we just stop and pause for a minute, it really is a great place to start. So thank you for helping me start the podcast with what we're grateful for, because
Yep.
it's the kind of seeds that I think can build great futures.
Well, and I would just challenge your listeners who are listening to this before the end of the podcast, answer that question for yourself. Keep listening. We're glad you're here, but figure out today, wherever you're at, whether you're driving in your car, whether you're sitting on the back porch of your house, having a cup of coffee, listening to this, figure out in the next 20 or 30 minutes, what are you grateful for today?
Awesome. Thanks, Robert. That perfect. Okay. So let me start here talking a little bit about Mr. Smith here. So a few years back, a good friend of mine now was a lady who was the CEO of the International Association of Fairs and Expos, Marla Calico, who has been on this podcast. And Marla invited me to come out and be part of a keynote speaking panel at the International Association of Fairs and Expos convention in Las Vegas. I'd never done anything like that, and it was a real honor for me. I go out, had a great time. Well, as a result of that, all of a sudden my phone starts ringing and I start getting invitations to go to state association, fair association groups. So anyway, I'm traveling to the great state of Arizona. And I was there and I'm there and I'm doing the keynote and then I'm doing this workshop. And there's this guy, and I'd already kind of walked through the career area and I'd seen, I remember back when I was a kid growing up, I saw the movie Big. And Tom Hanks had there was a Voltar machine, and I want to be big, I want to be big. And
That's it right there.
looky there. And I'm walking
I've
through,
got I've
and I
got a little model of Zoltar right here.
I
That's funny.
see this guy, but his gig was called The Conjurer. And
Yeah.
so I was just real intrigued by that. So anyway, I go do my workshop. Well, little did I know the conjurer himself is in my workshop. And so after the workshop, Robert Smith came up to me and we got to talking. And like all great friendships, all great networks, all great relationships, they start with a great conversation.
Yeah.
And Robert and I started a dialogue that day, and we were talking about the importance of advocacy and what it means to advocate for agriculture and talk about the positive things in our world and why it's important and what are best practices on engagement. And one thing led to another. Now here we are years later. We've kept up with each other when our travel paths cross. We try to get together when we can.
Yep.
Robert has an incredible podcast called the Fair Game Podcast, and where he talks to people. By the way, and I will let Robert really share more about this than I, because I don't know, but I found a whole new world with fairs and expos that I did not know existed. It is amazing everything that goes into putting on a fair and expo. And if you'll go back and watch the episode with Marla Calico, we talk about that a
Yep.
little bit more. But Robert is one of those vendors, and his brand has expanded beyond just being a vendor. He's also now kind of a consultant to help people improve their brand presence, improve their effectiveness in communicating their fairs and expos. But anyway, that's how Robert and I met. And so he honored me by having me on his podcast at one time. And I told him that, and we tried to do this before, but I said, I really want to circle back and get you on the Growing Our Future podcast. Robert,
Right.
I know that you didn't just fall into that chair. You didn't just happen into that chair. Something tells me there was a journey that brought you into this role that you're in, into the world that you work in, into this passion that you have for communication, marketing, and advocacy. Kind of give us that background. Walk us through that. Tell us how you got to Robert Smith Presents.
Well, I started my career many years ago as a magician, and I was not the conventional type of person. When I graduated from college, it was not that, well, I'm going to go get the job and I just didn't have that fire for that. I knew there was something different out there. And when I realized, wait, I can get paid pretty good money to go do magic tricks at fairs, 4 or 5 months, 7 months out of the year, I was like, oh, okay, this sounds a lot better than going to 9 to 5. And as that developed, the business side of me took over, and I start seeing, well, it's hard, really hard in the industry to be a magician because there's 10,000 magicians, and there's always somebody that'll do it for $50 less a day than you do, and it drives the price down. And being where I'm located in New Mexico, there's not a lot of fairs. I need to be able to get into the Midwest and East Coast and Florida and markets like that. And it's very brutal to compete. So I said, well, I need something that's going to stand out that nobody else does. And so Conjurer Fortune Machine was an idea that was hatched really by some of the entertainers at Triangle Talent. It's one of the agencies that supplies the fair market with entertainment. Guy's name is Richard Renner. He's out of Kansas City, and we were trying to come up with a unique way to do magic. And he says, well, you should do this conjure or this fortune machine. He didn't come up with a name, just like in the movie Big. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. And then the agent, Mark Sparks, was like, no, you should definitely do that. And so I said, okay, these guys have way more experience than me. I deferred to them and started building this thing. And now Conjure Fortune Machine took me places I couldn't imagine. And we've developed other attractions along the way that have been very successful. And so I've kind of realized my job wasn't to do magic tricks. My job was to provide an experience for people in the fair industry and I guess at fairs. And that's, as a business owner, that's when I realized, oh, okay, that's where the money is. Isn't look at me, I can do a cool magic trick that makes you go, wow. It's how do I provide experiences for people? And along that way, as everybody recalls, there were the dark years in 2020 and 2021 where the entire events industry pretty much globally was shut down. And that was a rough time. And it had gotten into, I want to say it was September, October of 20. I was starting to feel lonely. I was like, we're locked down. We're in our homes. There's no fairs going on. I was feeling isolated. And I'm like, well, we got this glorious thing called the internet. And I got microphones and I know how to talk to people, and I got a webcam and whatnot to be able to do Zoom. And so I got with 20 or 30 friends in the industry, and I started the Fair Game podcast. And the whole purpose of that was to tell our industry story from all sorts of different perspectives, from the perspective of a fair manager, from the perspective of concessionaires. I had Dominic Palmieri on, who's a fantastic guy. He's with RCS out there in California. They were in Houston because they do Houston show, and they were, I think, like 6 or 7 days in, 12 days to go, and Houston pulled the plug, said, you're done.
Yep.
They had how many hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock on hand that they cooked it and they gave it away, or whatever they had to do. They gave it away to the homeless people, the people in need, whatever, and they just took the loss on it and moved on. Stories from entertainers, stories from all sorts of different vendors, because like you said, the fair market just has such a depth of people that are involved in it, stories from all different places. And along that way, I realized, there's really something to this podcast. There is real value to it. Am I getting thousands of listens? No. Am I getting several hundred, a couple hundred on an episode? Yes. And does it help those people at that time? Did it help them kind of feel less alone and less isolated? Yes. And so that kind of, along the way, just before COVID in this journey, I discovered a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, and your listeners may know him as Gary V. He's a marketing brand expert with the creative agency VaynerMedia out of New York. And he always talks about, document, don't create. And I always wondered, like, what is he really saying? Like, it didn't get to me until I started the podcast. The podcast was nothing more than just documenting these stories, preserving them for all time, as long as, Spotify or YouTube or my website stay up. And as long as I've got the files, we've got a documented history of what all of us were feeling in the middle of that pandemic. And now recently we've decided, you know what, because it's been 1.5 years or 2 years since we've done an episode. I said, I've got some time. We're going to go back. We're doing 45 new episodes through 2024 with the Fair Game podcast, starting on February 13th. The first episode is going to drop. And we're not telling pandemic stories this time. We're just telling the story of awesome people in an awesome industry that services this nation that so often goes unseen. Was that a good short-winded answer for you?
It was awesome. I mean, I want to stay with this, but I do want to go a little further back. So you grew up in New Mexico, and
yes, sir.
You decided to go to college, and what was your degree in? Tell us a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Mexico. I was born in New Jersey, but when I was about 10 months old, my parents, somewhere before I was born, had taken a trip west, and they loved New Mexico. They loved the climate. They loved everything out here. And so in 1980, we moved out west, and I grew up in New Mexico. Ended up staying in state for school, went to Eastern New Mexico University, which is right there in Portales, not far from you guys. I mean, you're all about Texas Tech, right? And guns up and all that. And ENMU isn't, but I don't think, 75 or 80 minutes away from just on the New Mexico side from Lubbock. It is an agriculture town. And honestly, if I was to think about it, that's probably the first time that I was exposed to agriculture. Like, obviously growing up, I ate food. Like, I know my food came from farms and whatnot, but I remember walking across campus at night to the computer lab or something like that. And keep in mind, this was in the late 90s. So there were no iPhones, iPads, Wi-Fi wasn't really a thing. You had to have an Ethernet connection at that point. But I would walk across campus, and because of the number of dairy farms that were all around town and the ethanol plant that was on one side of the town, depending on which way the wind blew, you were either smelling manure or you were smelling ethanol.
That's funny.
And that's when I was like, oh man, I'm in an ag town for sure.
That's funny. So, here's something I don't think you know about me, but I actually used to do. Dr. Vaughn was the head of the ag science department ag ed department at EMU, and I used to go out and do workshops over at EMU long before you got there, by the way.
So Peeville, the sign out at the front on the north side of town when you come into town. It says, "Welcome to Portales, home of," I don't know, however many people they got. 10,000 people and 3 or 4 old grouches. That's their welcome to Portales sign.
That's funny. So yeah, so I think that's interesting, and I think that again, Robert, what I like about this podcast is listening to people's stories, because really, if you listen to their stories, there's really some words of wisdom and some seeds of greatness there, and you just shared some. Number one, I always tell people, if you'll listen to these guests, they are listening. And when we say listening, we're not just talking about with your ears, we're talking about your eyes. And listen to what you just shared. Okay. You had this career. Nobody saw COVID coming. Nobody saw COVID coming. And we had to make some choices at that moment. I think the popular word was pivots. We had to make pivots. And so we're all trying.
Key Ross, pivot.
So here's the thing. Some people, what they heard was gloom and despair.
Yeah.
And that's what they saw. Some people saw and heard opportunity to be empathetic, to say that maybe there's another way here. And I think that you're sharing your story, Robert, of how you decided to take a technology and make it a platform for empathy, a point that we could share in the moment together. There's something that Robert shared with me, and I don't know if it's him or his wife that said it, but I thought it was always good, is that we might be in the same storm together, but we're not necessarily in the same boat together.
Yeah, that was Sarah. That was because she was dealing with that. Yeah, my wife's is a elementary school assistant principal, and that was one of her observations and honestly, she may have picked it up from somebody else. So if somebody goes, wait, that's the so-and-so quote.
Sure.
Sure, credit whoever, but it was Sarah that brought it to my attention. And I think it was a really astute observation, especially during that pandemic.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about. So again, if I'm a student right now in a classroom, you're going to have some challenges. You're going to have some storms in life. And oh, by the way, if you don't want them, I can take you to a place that it never rains. I can take you there. It's called a desert and nothing grows. But you show me somebody that's had a little challenge in their life, a little challenge in their business, and I guarantee you I can show you somebody who's took that rain and made something grow out of it. And Robert is a great example of that. He took some challenges and he found a niche and he found a way to kind of leverage that as a communication tool. And to your point, Robert, I tell, one of my favorite books is a book called Same Kind of Different as Me. It's a true story of a homeless man and a family in Fort Worth, Texas. And the family, finally, the husband wants the homeless man to speak in his church. And they show up, and there's just a handful of cars in the parking lot. And the father goes inside and he comes back and he says, I'm too embarrassed. I'm ashamed. And that old wise blind, that man just said, listen, he said, God's got in there who God wants to hear this message.
Yeah.
He goes inside and he gives the message. They open up the back doors to the church, true story. And by the time he finished, it was standing room only in that church because people heard him and started flocking in.
Yeah.
We never know who needs to hear what you're broadcasting. No, we don't ever know who's going to take something from this podcast. Our responsibility is that God gave us an incredible gift here to share. And that's our job, is to share.
Well, and I look at it when I think about the podcast, I'm obviously fair game and growing our future. We're not Joe Rogan, we're not getting 100 million, multi-million dollar deals. We're just having these conversations and for posterity. And, I've got one episode that had 23 listens, 23. Did it make a difference for those 23? Maybe, maybe not. But I tell you what, who it really made a difference for was every one of those guests that came on the podcast during the pandemic, because it gave them an outlet to talk, gave them an outlet to verbalize it and talk about the hurt and the disappointment and the struggle. And maybe for somebody that helped them process a little bit better the stress and I don't want to use necessarily trauma, because I feel like that's kind of an overused buzzword, but for some people it certainly was. And if that gave them the outlet, then here I am, I'll do it. turn the mic on, let's go.
And what I say to that, thank you, because you didn't have to. That's the whole point of this. I hope there's a young person out there listening right now. I've still got a Sunday school class that gets together. We still get together. I bust the age curve of that class because I'm probably the youngest member in there. There's a lot of widowers in that class, but I refuse not to help us come together during that time of we needed connection. I used to tell people through that time, Robert, I used to say, I will be physically distanced because you tell me that that's what we've got to do is be physically distanced. I said, I refuse to be socially distanced.
Yeah.
I refuse to buy into that. And I believe that technology and things like this allowed us an opportunity to keep going. So,
yeah. Well, and the conversations we had, anybody who goes and listens to Fair Game podcast, you hear what we publish. But unless you're involved in podcasting, you probably don't click that. I mean, you and I were probably talking for 20 or 25 minutes before we even started the recording. And on mine, it was 20 or 25 minutes afterwards. And that stuff, because it's outside of the recording, once we signed off, none of that will ever see the light of day. But I can tell you this, the anxiety and depression and real struggle. And I wish we could have put some of it on the air. People didn't want it. They didn't want that all out public, but they were willing to open it up to me. Those were some of the most valuable conversations. And you said before, our friendship started on a good conversation. My friendship with a lot of these managers started finding out that there were some struggles with alcoholism that had come back. There were struggles with depression. There were and all of a sudden that's when I realized, God, that's how you're using me. That's the purpose of this. It's not for me to put out a podcast that gets thousands of listens. It's for that 12 minutes that we talk afterwards. And that person says to me, you're not recording anymore, right? No, I shut the recording off. Sounds like you got something on your mind. I just need to know it's going to be okay. This is what's going on. And they would open up. And that's when it was like, oh, this is my servant role to the community. Is this 10 or 12? It's not the hour we just spoke. It's this 7 minutes that they're going to open something up and go. And then there were several guests that broke down into tears at the end of it. And I'm like, man, they were all smiling and laughing and joking on the show. But then when it came down and the rubber met the road, it was like they were hurt. They were in dark places. And so that's when it was like, wow, the ability to listen, the ability to articulate, to help them process some of the grief that they were going through. That's what the podcast was for. And you guys will never hear it because I'm some of the times the recording, I had to stop recording. Some of the times it was still recording. I just won't put that stuff out,
Well, the point is that life is not a solo project.
Correct.
We were not created to be the Lone Ranger, and none of us is as strong as all of us. And when we go through challenges like that, it's nice to have a group that you can kind of lean into, share with, learn from. And this podcast and your podcast is no different. So That's why I appreciate you coming on. Robert, one of the things that I'd like about what you do and kind of your strategy behind things is you've got a knack for trying to pay attention, again, look and listen, marketing, promotion. I ask the kids all the time. It's funny. I ask the kids, I said, tell me about your business. And they always tell me, they say, I don't have a business. I said, yeah, you do. You're it. I said,
your personal brand.
I said, what's your customer service? Do you show up to work on time? Are you friendly? And we go through exactly that. Give kids some tips. Give us all some tips. Ag teachers, all of our listeners, give them some tips on how to live their brand in an effective way that helps them share their competitive edge, but also helps them share how they can pour in and help others.
I think just like we started off the top of the show, I think you need to bathe yourself in gratitude every day. Like wake up every day. Listen, I have plenty of things I can be grumpy about every morning. Sometimes I am. I'm a 44-year-old with arthritis. My joints are hurt. My back is not what it used to be. My vision is not what it used to be. And I still wake up every morning and I look over and I go, okay, my wife's still there. That's awesome. We got another shot. Let's see what. So that's a tip. No matter how, and it's God, it sounds so cliche. Oh yeah, gratitude. Like that's a buzzword. No, it's real. Like it's not a buzzword. It's a practice. It's medicine. It really is. It's
Mm,
medicine for the soul.
mm. It's a
So
practice. I like it.
yeah. I would also say, I hope that people, young people listening, hear this. Fail faster. There's too many people that spend so much time trying to avoid failing. I don't want to fail, or they never get started because they fail. You know, I heard somebody say once that
Mm.
the real definition of hell is you die and God shows you the life you could have had. And it's like, I heard that once and I went, oh, but you were too scared of failing. You were too scared someone was going to laugh at you. You were too scared someone was going to say mean things in a comment on Instagram. And so you didn't start. And so I would say fail faster. Go try it. You're going to fail. I promise you, you will get more from the people who have succeeded, from your actual peers, not the little blah, 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 blah naysayers on Instagram who have nothing better to do with their lives. Your actual peers are the people you are aspiring to be like, the
Mm.
people that have made it, right? They will give you more respect than you can possibly imagine if you try and fail and you keep going. And then I say to those people who are like, yeah, man, but the people that, my friends at school, they always say mean things about me. I would say the answer to that is empathy. Imagine the level of pain someone has to be in to be like, I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to crap all over people that, random strangers because I don't like their video.
Mm.
Man, what a rough place to be in. Deploy empathy. And all of a sudden you're going to start to click and be like, wow, I'm almost like my skin is almost impermeable to any criticism because it just doesn't matter. It just, that negativity that gets dished out on the internet, deploy empathy, you know. That's kind of where my thought is for young people, for ag teachers, any teachers. I kind of have some intimate knowledge on this because my wife was in the classroom for many years and is an assistant principal. Um, just know that a lot of those kids that you're struggling with, that you may want to throw up your hands and go, this kid's a lost cause. Nope, they're not. They're not. There's something they need that you're not delivering, and it's your job to figure that out.
Yeah, I love that what you just said, Robert. One of the things I like to share as I ask audiences, I don't know about New Mexico, but I can tell you in Texas, Friday night football is a big deal.
It's religion in Southeast New Mexico.
So
But
here's
that's
what
like,
I
we
think.
call that far west Texas. Southeast New Mexico is far west Texas.
But I like to ask the question, have you ever been to a Friday night football game? Everybody chuckles. I said, yeah, I went to one. And I said, there were 7 coaches on the sideline. At halftime, 3 more coaches came out of the press box. And then I found out there were 3 more coaches that were out scouting other teams for future games. I said, now do the math on that. 13 coaches. For what? For one night of one season of a kid's life. To do what? To compete on a football field. That kid's about to have to compete for their entire future.
Yep.
What are we doing to compete for their minds? What are we doing to compete for their attention so that we can share with them things that will get them through the competition of life?
Right.
So when you said that, I think there's a lot of genius behind that. That there is I can tell personal stories. There was an Aaron Alejandro sitting in your classroom that
Yep.
felt inadequate, that wasn't certain, that wasn't sure, that came from broken circumstances. There was somebody there that needed somebody that was willing to take the time to say, I'm going to compete for your attention. I'm going to compete for your attention because I want to share these seeds of greatness for you. And I was very blessed along my life's journey to have those people that were willing to share and pour into me and tell me not always what I wanted to hear, but what I needed to hear. People that were
Yeah.
willing to say, let me make you better. And because so much has been given to me, I guess that's why I enjoy getting to go out and share that with others. I was in Wyoming and I was speaking up there at the Fair and Expo, and I'll never forget it. I was leaving and It was actually Utah. And I was leaving, and this gentleman said, "Well, where's your next gig?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about." He goes, "Where do you speak next?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "Well, how do you make a living if you don't know?" And I said, "This really isn't my job." I,
Right.
I just enjoy doing this because, again, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I just felt like I need to give back. And so when I get an opportunity to share, I just want to go do it. And like you said, find that person that needs a little extra. Find
Yep.
that person that needs to have somebody compete for their attention.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I'll tell you what, there's a group of kids that are coming up through the ranks right now that are going to need a lot of it. Right now, Sarah's seeing it kind of next year will probably be the actual reset year where kindergartners come in and actually hit the reset button. Because if you think
mhm.
when anybody who's going to go into kindergarten, first or second grade, even third grade, but let's say K through 2, the year the pandemic hit and we shut everything down, those first 2 or 3 years are not about the ABCs. They're not about counting. They're not about recognizing colors. They're about learning how to learn. They're about learning our systems. They're about learning lining up, learning about respect for others, and how to start communicating when someone takes your red crayon, but you wanted to use it,
Mhm.
how to regulate emotions, all those kinds of things. And right now, what elementary school teachers all across this country are seeing is there is a block of students that are now moving that were the COVID kids that did not get that development. They may be in fourth grade now, but they're still functioning on a kinder or first grade level
Wow.
because they were not in school. We saw very similar results with 9/11 babies. Sarah could trace the kids that were where mom was pregnant when 9/11 happened and that stress and trauma. And all of a sudden, there was this little group of kids that went through grade level by grade level where behaviors were just outrageous. And then the kids before were fine, and the kids a year or two after were fine. But this middle group was, and we're now dealing with it. So I can tell you, there needs to be a whole lot of empathy. Our education system needs to restructure what they're teaching and how they're doing it, because the catch up for these kids is going to be lifelong. You will have these kids who are third graders now that don't know how to associate with people, that don't know how to interact, that don't know how to self-regulate. They're only 10 years from being out in the real world. That's not a lot of time to correct that.
Well, I think there's a lot of really good stuff here, and I don't think it's new. By the way, I like to tell people I don't think there's anything new set under the sun.
Yeah.
You read the Bible; they face the same challenges we face today. They just looked a lot different. But
Yep.
but there are things that remain constant, and one of those is resiliency. And if we can train young people to be resilient today, they can be stronger tomorrow.
Absolutely.
We just have to be aware of what this is all about, which is what you're sharing, and we have to be willing to compete. And if we're willing to be aware and compete, maybe we can plant seeds of resiliency that make those kids stronger down the road. So those were some really good words. Um, Robert, we're going to start wrapping up here, but I'm thinking about leadership development, and I like to give students and teachers strategies that can help them become stronger and better leaders. If you were going to share some leadership tips, what might be some leadership tips you'd share with young people?
Be prepared to take responsibility for everything. If you're going to be in leadership, be prepared to take responsibility for everything. That includes the failures of your team members. When, and I get this from Jocko Willink. If any of your listeners want to look into him, he's a former Navy SEAL, super good dude. But he talks about leadership and the amount of power that is in accountability. When you talk about when he was on the SEAL teams, when he was, a platoon commander or whatever the role was, if something wasn't happening right, he was the guy. Not he didn't go, ream out his guy in front of everybody. He
Mm.
pulled him aside and said, I think I've made a mistake. I must have, I don't think I communicated this appropriately to you. He damn well may have communicated it correct, but he took the ownership and said, this is on me. If
Mm.
you're not performing to your highest, this is on me. And I think there's a lot of power and accountability. Like I go back to, and Gary Vee talks about this too. I go back to the scene at the end of 8 Mile, if that movie with Eminem, where he's in the rap battle, and instead of going and rapping about all of his opponent's weaknesses, he puts all his stuff out on the table and he's like, yep, I'm a bum. I got a friend who, shot himself in the foot, who live in a trailer with my mom and blah, 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 blah. He puts it all out on the table. And then he hands the mic to the other guy. And the other guy's like, I got nothing to say about him. And so Eminem wins the battle, right? I think if you can wear your losses with as a sense of a badge of honor, don't be afraid. If you're out there and you're like, yeah, this is my weakness, put it out there. Put it out to the world, because right now that weakness is probably controlling you. You're letting it control you. Put your weaknesses out there. And what you're going to find, and I'm speaking mainly to young leaders, but certainly older leaders can take something from this. Young leaders, what you're going to find, if you're willing to just put your weaknesses out there and articulate them, it takes their power away. And now you're not stuck. You're not stuck going, oh, well, last time I spoke in front of people, I lost my train of thought and I felt like an idiot and I was a blubbering mess. No, next time you give a speech, go stand up and say, you guys are probably expecting me to be a blubbering mess like last time. Oh, bam, we just addressed that 800-pound gorilla and now we're moving on. I think lifetime value, you get a lot of respect if you just put it out there, and everybody's got something. Everybody's got a weakness. Put it out to the world. Be accountable for your behavior. Be accountable for what you need to be as a leader. Yeah, that's what I'll give for that one.
That's some good stuff. I'm taking notes.
It's a good thing we recorded this. You can go back and listen.
I'm telling you, that's good stuff. Robert, listen, hey, I just again want to tell you thank you. It's an honor to get to know you. It's an honor to get to work with you. It's an honor just to share some of the dialogues that we have, where we're fleshing out. We're both trying to find what are best practices, what are best strategies. You share good stuff with me. I try to share some stuff with you. But you know what? It's just another example. Like we said, life's not a solo project, and none of us is as strong as all of us. And I hope that we're all stronger today because of your effort to share with just not your audience, but now with our audience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Aaron.
Robert, every guest gets one last fun question. So now you get the fun question. So the fun.
See, you didn't send this one in advance. You sent me the prep work, but I did not. It just says fun question on your rundown. So
here's the fun.
I'm nervous.
I'm just curious. What's the best concert you've ever been to?
Oh my God, best concert. Okay. Let's see. Was it Boyz II Men? Was it Boyz II Men or was it Boyz II Men? So here's this. I'll give you the story real quick. I've been a Motown fan, like a monstrous Motown fan since I was like 11 years old. And so it would have been 2008. That summer, Sarah and I were living in Orlando, but we moved back to Albuquerque. So we still had annual passes to Disney. Well, it turns out that October, Boyz II Men was going to be playing at Epcot. They have this annual food and wine festival. And so they were going to be playing. Well, of course, when they do these concerts, they do like 3 concerts a night. They're like 25-minute shows. And so we go and we're sitting out because we wanted to be front row, because it's first come, first serve when you go to these shows. We want to be front row. So we're sitting out here waiting for like 3 hours, and people are coming up to us going, man, I wouldn't come all the way to Disney World just to sit there for 3 hours. And I'm like, dude, I came all the way from Mexico for this. So we'd go all the way in for the first show and we get front row. And then, of course, when they sing I'll Make Love to You, they hand out roses to the girls on the first couple rows. And Sarah would get a rose from one of them. And then they'd clear the theater and we'd get back in line for the second show. But what would happen is we got to the front of the line for the second show, we would stop. And we now became the first people in line for the third show. So everybody else would file in past us. And the third show, we would go in, we'd have front row again, and we would collect all these. She would get these roses again. So we did 4 shows in 2 days, hopped on a plane, went home. It was amazing. And to this day, right up there in this box right there.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that I had. The pictures from the show, autographs from Boyz II Men, and the 4 roses are still in there. And there have been like 2 others that have been added from other concerts when they've been in Albuquerque. So am I a little obsessed with Boyz II Men?
Hey, that right there, Robert, I've asked that question to a lot of guests. That could be one of the best answers yet. So
that means Boyz II Men. ABC BBD. Let's go, man.
Yep. I know it well. That's awesome. That's good stuff. And I love it. And I think too, asking that question to guests just shows you how unique we all are. That have different, everything from Metallica to Harry Connick Jr. to R&B to, I'm a diehard Parrot Head. I love, Jimmy. I love Bruce. I mean, it's, King George is always a popular one, but the point is I think it's also unique to hear people's perspectives. And so thank you for sharing a very unique story.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So we'll all know that if we ever show up to a Boyz II Men concert, just look for you and Sarah, and we'll know
near the front row. So. Look for the very bald dude with the shiny white head right up front where Boyz II Men is singing.
That's hilarious. Robert, thanks for being here today. Ladies and
pleasure,
gentlemen, thanks for joining us for the Growing Our Future podcast. Again, we're just so grateful for the guests that we have that are willing to come on and just share their experiences, their insights, their expertise, and this incredible platform that we have that allows us to be engaged in classrooms, radios, wherever it may be being viewed. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, if you want to know what the future is, grow it. Grow the future you want. But you got to plant those seeds. You got to take care of those seeds. And then do me a favor, when you harvest it, share it with others. Share it with others so they can plant great trees behind you. Until we meet again, go out and do something great for somebody. You're going to feel good about it. And along the way, we just make our communities, our state, and our country a better place to live, work, and raise our families. Thank you for joining us.